On Friday, Brussels approved tariffs up to 35% on imports following an investigation into Chinese state subsidies. The EU has claimed that China unfairly subsidizes its electric vehicle industry, giving it a competitive edge over European car makers. Now, after the EU's actions against China's EV sector, Beijing has targeted Europe's brandy. China's Commerce Ministry announced provisional tariffs on EU brandy imports on Tuesday, ranging from 30% to nearly 40%, with French cognac expected to be hit the hardest, as it makes up around 95% of European brandy exports to China. The EU is growing increasingly concerned as these provisional anti-dumping tariffs, particularly focused on French cognac, could significantly impact European exports to China. Unveiled on October 8, 2024, these new tariffs, ranging from 30.6% to 39% for major cognac brands, including Martell, Rémy Martin, and Hennessy, have sent shockwaves through global trade circles and highlighted rising tensions between the EU and China. These substantial increases could reshape the luxury spirits market in China. Why is this happening now? The timing is notable, as these tariffs will take effect on October 11, 2024, shortly after the announcement. This dispute traces back to September 2024, when the EU imposed tariffs of up to 35.3% on Chinese electric vehicles, claiming that these manufacturers benefited from unfair subsidies over European automakers. China swiftly retaliated with investigations into EU imports, including pork, dairy, and wine. The early 2024 brandy investigation has now culminated in these new tariffs. Why focus on cognac? It's not only about the drink, it represents French luxury and a significant export to China, valued at $1.85 billion in 2023. For cognac producers, China is the second largest market, and losing it could be catastrophic, impacting both retailers and the broader wine-growing industry. Interestingly, China is not imposing these tariffs without justification. China is accusing European brandy producers of dumping, that is, selling products in China at prices lower than in their home markets, a practice they argue threatens the local brandy industry. Stepping back, this isn't only about brandy or electric vehicles. It reflects an intensifying trade tension between two major global trading powers, the EU and China. Although economic partners, these regions have had ongoing disputes on issues like subsidies, market access, and intellectual property. The brandy tariffs add a new chapter to this saga, with significant impacts already in motion. Shares for major cognac producers like Rémy Cointreau and Pernod Ricard took a sharp downturn as soon as the tariffs were announced, with Rémy Cointreau's stock dropping by 8%, a major financial hit. But it's not just about stocks. The French cognac industry depends heavily on the Chinese market, affecting everything from vineyards and distilleries to bottling plants and exporters. A prolonged tariff could result in reduced sales, lower market share, and potential job losses, especially in regions where cognac production is both an economic lifeline and a source of national pride. This dispute cuts deep, touching on culture and national identity, as well as economics. So, what's next? The EU has plans to appeal to the World Trade Organization, accusing China of misusing trade rules. However, WTO proceedings are complex and can be slow, with no guarantee of a quick outcome. Meanwhile, the European Commission has committed to supporting affected EU producers, but whether this will come as financial aid, subsidies, or diplomatic actions remains to be seen. The EU, however, is not entirely unified on this issue. Different countries have different stakes and perspectives. For example, France has been a strong proponent of tariffs on Chinese EVs and is actively defending its cognac industry. Germany, another powerhouse in the automotive sector, is more cautious. It even abstained from the vote on EV tariffs due to concerns over potential backlash against German car exports to China, one of their largest markets. Each EU member has its own priorities. Some are more invested in agriculture, others in manufacturing. While some nations adopt a tougher stance on China, others favor a more diplomatic approach. These diverse interests make it challenging for the EU to present a united front as they navigate this complex web of competing priorities. This internal division within the EU has implications that go well beyond the Cognac dispute, casting doubt on the EU's decision-making cohesion and its capacity to present a unified stance globally. When member states are pulling in opposing directions, the EU's negotiating strength diminishes, making it more susceptible to divide-and-conquer strategies, a tactic often attributed to China. Zooming out, this isn't just about EU-China relations. The dispute hints at larger issues in global trade relations. We're in an era of rising trade tensions, where the risk of a major trade war looms. If two of the world's largest economies, the EU and China, were to engage in a prolonged cycle of reciprocal tariffs, the repercussions could be vast. This isn't just about electric vehicles and cognac. It potentially affects a range of industries, from agriculture and luxury goods to technology. And the impact isn't purely economic. There are geopolitical dimensions as well. The ongoing US-China trade rivalry raises questions about the EU's role. Will it align more closely with the US or carve out an independent path? The answers could shape global power dynamics. However, this also presents opportunities. The EU has been exploring ways to diversify its trade relationships and reduce reliance on China. This dispute could act as a catalyst, driving the EU to strengthen ties with regions like Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and to build a more balanced global trade network. Moreover, trade disputes can prompt innovation. In the case of electric vehicles, the EU's tariffs on Chinese EVs aren't just about protecting European automakers, they're also aimed at fostering Europe's own EV industry and investing in future technologies. Other high-stakes sectors, such as artificial intelligence, 5G, and renewable energy, will also be affected by how these trade tensions unfold, determining who will lead these critical industries. Innovation, however, thrives not just through competition, but also through cooperation, like setting global standards and sharing knowledge. Here lies a real opportunity. If the EU, China, and other major economies can find ways to collaborate, the benefits would extend globally. However, such cooperation is challenging, as it requires bridging deep-rooted differences in economic models, state subsidies, market access, and intellectual property rights. The EU's strategy in managing its domestic industries reflects a careful mix of open market principles and selective intervention. On the one hand, it advocates for free trade and fair competition. On the other, it's ready to implement tariffs and trade protections when necessary. But this raises a critical question. Is this approach effective, or does it risk fueling protectionist cycles that could ultimately hurt all involved? The Cognac tariffs illustrate the risks of such measures potentially backfiring. In contrast, the US has taken a more confrontational stance with China, showing greater willingness to engage directly, while the EU traditionally favors a diplomatic approach. Nonetheless, there's an opening for coordination between the EU and the US. Aligning strategies could significantly strengthen their collective negotiating power with China, though differing approaches could also allow China to exploit any lack of unity. The stakes are high, and both cooperation and divergence will shape the global trade landscape. There is much to be learned from past trade disputes and their resolutions. History suggests that escalation seldom leads to favorable outcomes. Progress is generally achieved through negotiation, compromise, and a commitment to a rules-based system. This is why many experts are advocating for a robust, multilateral trading system anchored by the WTO. But let's shift to China's perspective. They view these tariffs as straightforward protectionism. From their stance, The EU is using trade defense tools to shield its industries from fair competition, and they may have a point, as there is an ongoing debate about where fair competition ends and protectionism begins. Yet, it's more nuanced. China's economic model diverges significantly from the EU's, relying heavily on state subsidies and industrial policy. For China, these are legitimate developmental tools, whereas the EU sees them as distorting fair competition. This difference is vital to understanding China's position, especially as it aims to move up the value chain and establish itself in key industries. The electric vehicle industry is a prime example. China has invested heavily to become a global EV leader and views the EU tariffs as a direct challenge to these ambitions. However, China must also tread carefully to avoid alienating its trading partners since it still needs foreign investment and technology. They are balancing retaliation with maintaining favorable economic ties. China's broader global strategy is also relevant here. The Belt and Road Initiative, for instance, is reshaping trade relationships across Asia, Africa, and Europe. How might the Cognac dispute affect China's relations with other trade partners? As for the future of EU-China trade relations, there are several scenarios to consider. One is a negotiated settlement, where the EU and China work through their differences and agree to reduce or remove tariffs. This would ideally de-escalate tensions and restore stability to their trade relationship. However, further escalation is also possible. If negotiations falter or either side perceives unfair treatment, we could see more tariffs and trade barriers, potentially spiraling into a broader trade war with significant implications for global economic stability. The importance of diplomacy and high-level dialogue cannot be understated, as history shows that breakthroughs often arise from these discussions. Sometimes, a simple exchange between leaders can unlock a deadlock. Regardless of the outcome, it is evident that we need a more sustainable and inclusive trade framework, one that balances the needs of both developed and developing economies and accommodates different developmental models. Looking forward, the future of EU-China trade relations may take several paths. One scenario could see WTO-led negotiations that result in a gradual tariff reduction, stabilizing relations and setting a positive precedent for resolving future disputes. Alternatively, an unwillingness to compromise might lead to an expansion of trade barriers beyond Cognac and EVs, leading to a deeper decoupling of the EU and Chinese economies and affecting global supply chains. There is also the possibility of a middle ground, where sector-specific agreements allow the EU and China to find common ground in certain areas while continuing to disagree in others. This incremental approach may provide a path forward, even if it doesn't solve every issue immediately. The role of other global powers, especially the United States, will be essential in shaping these outcomes. Should the EU and US align their strategies on China, it could greatly influence Beijing's decisions. Conversely, if China manages to create divisions among Western allies, it could strengthen its position in negotiations. The broader global context also plays a significant role. Factors like climate change, technological innovation, and post-pandemic recovery will all impact the evolution of this trade relationship. For example, the shared need to meet climate goals might encourage both sides to cooperate in other trade areas. The Cognac dispute, although impactful, is just one element of a much larger picture. It reflects deeper structural challenges within the global trading system. As we look ahead, there's growing recognition of the need for a more sustainable, inclusive approach to international trade. This might involve reforming institutions like the WTO to make them more responsive to modern challenges, developing new frameworks for state subsidies or digital trade, or even rethinking how free trade principles align with national strategic interests. Whatever form it takes, one thing is certain: the future of EU-China trade relations will have ripple effects beyond these two economies. It will shape global economic growth, technological advancements, and international efforts to tackle challenges like climate change. Thanks for watching The Global Narrative. See you in the next video.